All right, welcome today to the Rebuild the Construction Mindset podcast with Jenna and Kelley. Thank you for joining us again. Excited about today's episode. Before we get into that, please remember to subscribe, follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, or just follow us on the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever else you're listening. Really want to get those follows and rates. So handing it off to Jenna.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelley. So today we have Angelo Suntries on with us, all the way from Canada. Ontario, is that Ontario?
Ontario is the province, yeah, Toronto, and we don't live in igloos. I just want to preface the conversation with that.
I love that.
Wondering.
Angelo is, well, I'll kind of let you introduce yourself because I feel like I've been reading your book and I feel like I know you kind of now, but I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself, Angelo.
Oh, cool. Thanks. I appreciate that. Basically, so my name's Angelo Suntries. I usually like to introduce myself as a construction guy. I've been in the industry for about 20 years now. Started out in mechanical engineering as a school, in my schooling, engineering. And when I graduated, I kind of, like any engineer, wanted to be the best consultant in the world. I wanted to get into HVAC design. And at the time, we were kind of coming out of a recession in the early 2000s, and there weren't many jobs. So I ended up basically starting to run out of money, and I started applying to whatever was available, and that's how I ended up working in construction, actually. And I thank my lucky stars for the way it happened that way, because I instantly fell in love with the industry and was surprised that it was almost such a golden nugget that nobody really talked about, because it's not really promoted in the schools. I think it's a little bit different now, but back then it was absolutely not. So I started my career and then just had a regular career progression. Went from like a coordinator, did a little bit of estimating, moved my way up to project manager. And as I kind of increased my experience in the industry, my passion was elevated, but so was my frustration with the way things operated. And I saw more and more the gap in interpersonal communications and how to have difficult conversations and effective communication, essentially, which was all basic human skills that we don't receive training on, because construction is very technical. I'm sure we'll touch on that topic a little bit more later. So kind of fast forward, now I'm operations manager for a mid-sized mechanical company here in Canada, and that's kind of my 9 to 5. And on the side, I pursued a bit of a passion project in what I called the human side of construction. So I do a little business consulting for smaller enterprises and personal career coaching for people either struggling with certain situations in their career or looking to make the next leap. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Awesome. So when you say you started your side project, your passion project, when did you do that in your career? Like at what point were you like, this needs to be something that needs to be out in the industry?
So it really started, I guess, a year and a half ago, and it was almost by coincidence because, I had a random post on LinkedIn, and I never aspired to become any influencer type or post regularly, but I was feeling particularly inspired one day. Is it okay if I tell a quick story here?
Yeah, of course.
So I was leaving a job site, and we had just got essentially substantial completion on a hospital we just built. And it's a pretty cheesy story, so bear with me. So I walk out of the site because we got the certificate. We had a bit of a party. Everybody was feeling pretty good. And I went to leave the trailer to go home, and I turned around and I saw this hospital, and it hit me. I looked over to my one side, and there was an elderly person with a walker going towards the hospital. I looked to the other side. There was a woman coming out of the hospital with the stroller, pushing a baby. And it hit me. I was like, we didn't just build a thing here. Like, this is somewhere that has impact on this community and all the people in it. And that's really the magic of construction. We're not there to build stuff or fulfill the base requirements of a contract. We're there to build cool stuff and shape society. And there's a story there that a lot of people don't know about in the general public. So anyway, I took a picture of the hospital and I kind of posted something of that sentiment, not that long, obviously. And it got a lot of engagement. And I thought, there's a story here that people want to hear more about. They're interested in. So I started posting, then I started posting a little bit more. And then the momentum just kind of picked up, and then all the content started coming out. I ended up kind of, fast forward a little bit, had enough to basically put the book out, which was very well received earlier last year when it came out. And yeah, so that's kind of how the whole journey began. So much like my career in construction, I almost kind of fell into this human side, but it really seems to be continuing to pick up momentum.
Yeah.
What did you find what did you find passionate when you fell into construction? When you said you like fell into it and you just like fell in love with it, what was it about construction that made you want to go, I want to stay here and continue instead of going back to engineering?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for me, it was the tangible aspect of it, especially coming from a theoretical field like engineering, which is called an applied science, but really you don't learn how to apply it much in school. I remember taking, even specific to, HVAC courses, you learn about chillers and pumps and the heat flows and, BTUs and GPMs, all this stuff, but it's just kind of numbers on a page. So I remember the first time I walked into a mechanical room and the guy I was with, he was an HVAC technician, and he was being a bit of a dick because I probably had an attitude coming out of school. But we walked because, engineer, I know everything. And that we walked into a mechanical room and he points at something. He goes, "You know what that is, Mr. Engineer?" And I said, "No, buddy, I have no idea." And he goes, "That's a chiller." And it was like a light bulb literally went off in my head because I could see it. I could see the pipes connecting. I could see the valves and the pumps. And then all the numbers kind of started to make sense. So it's really the practical aspect. And, watching a building come to life when you're looking at it in drawings and then you actually look up and it's there. It's an amazing, amazing feeling.
I would say I had something, well, I had it like in high school, but I wanted to be an architect when I was in high school. And I interned for a summer with an architect that I knew in where I grew up. And then the next summer I worked for a general contractor and I got that experience being on site. And I saw the architect not coming on site every single day. And I learned very quickly, and I think my mom said she always knew, I do not have an architect brain. I am very much like the black and white kind of, I don't like have that artistic look of things. And I learned very quickly that I liked being on the job site. I liked the tangible aspect of building something, watching it grow, coming out every day and seeing the differences. And knowing that you had some type of an impact on making that happen made me so excited. And I went through construction management because of a very similar reason to you, basically. It's that tangible being out there. We aren't doing it with our hands, but we're helping with some part of that to have the guys out in the field be able to do that. So I would say we have that as a commonality. So that's really awesome for you.
No, that's what even people I've talked to, which was another cool thing about starting to post, because originally I thought, you know what, I'm just one random guy putting my thoughts out there. But it does bring people together. I'm sure folks experience the same with the podcast and you're drawing attention and all this stuff. And this is the good stuff about the internet and social media. Most of it is terrible, and I don't want to get into that. And it's like just divisive and isolating and all that stuff. But this is the real cool stuff, like coming together with people with similar passions. And that's another thing that fascinated me about the industry was it's almost like it's a secret, right? Like the general population, I mean, people who don't work in construction, even my wife, I've been in construction almost 20 years. I don't even know, not that she's not smart, but I don't think she fully understands what I do and what we do on site. And same with my parents too. But so they don't have like the general population doesn't have a real understanding or awareness of what it takes to build a building. Because you might drive by a construction site every day on your way to work and the concrete's going up and then the finishes go up and then one day they're walking in and that's, to them it's a new building and it smells nice and it looks cool. But there were years between the permitting and the pre-construction and the development and the planning and the estimating and the negotiating, blood, sweat, and tears, like thousands of hours, men and women putting this thing together. And yeah, it's really neat, and I wish more people knew about it. That's why I like having these conversations. Sorry if I get excited here. I'm geeking out a little bit.
No, you're good.
Do not
I think of that like when you see what you were saying, you see the concrete grip, and then you see like the skin go on, and then people are like, "Oh, it's gonna be open soon," and like you're like, "No, there's so much work happening."
Yeah.
The easiest, and I say that as like it's not easy, but like the easiest part is the skin. Well, you just have less trades kind of involved, and it's a very easy step step-by-step process in a way where the interior is so much stuff going on with mechanical, electrical. So I think it's funny when people are like, oh, well, the exterior looks done. It's like, no, not even close.
Yeah,
Not even close to being done. We've got a lot more inside.
Yeah. I appreciate what you said though, or what you're doing by trying to educate the general population, because I feel like a lot of the times, when anyone that doesn't understand construction is walking by a construction site, it's almost like they look down on the workers. They look down on everyone, and that I even have experienced that in my life, like even being a female, walking into a hospital that was already been opened and the nurse is not even looking at me, versus like if I walked in without my PPE on, I would get a smile at least, so I've experienced it myself where PPE is almost like you put it on and you're almost like invisible once you put it on.
Yeah, and that's, just to elaborate on that a little bit, because it's a really interesting conversation, is there's definitely a stigma towards construction workers. And I think you can lump, project managers, estimators, anybody in the construction field, like you said, you put on a hard hat, you could be a vice president, but they see you in a hard hat and a vest and they see a construction worker. And you're right, people look down on it. Why? Because I think it's been predominantly a marketing issue. All the general population knows about construction is what you see in the movies or what you read in the news. Like if you Google construction now, seldom will you probably see a good news story. It'll be like, this job's late, this job's over budget, this job's in court, this is claim, that claim. And that's what people know. And then, we're not teaching kids about it in school. Now it's a little bit better, like I mentioned before, but and it's not really shown as a viable career path. And that's what's interesting. Kelly, you mentioned it kind of before we started, was with Instagram, right? Because a lot of the people that I've engaged with on Instagram are at the field level workers, and they basically ended up in construction because they didn't have another choice. So you essentially have a marginalized percentage of the population that kind of got stuck in construction because they weren't accepted anywhere else because grades, lifestyle, other life circumstances, whatever. And that's what people think is construction. So it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy or something. Like, I don't know, I've lost my train of thought there, but I thought I was onto something good.
I think it was good. I mean, I would definitely say, yeah, there's an agreement with that. That's not looked at as paying well. It's not looked at as a successful career. I think there's, with the history of where we don't have a lot of people coming in the trades, or have been in the last 20 years. And it's one of the reasons we potentially have the downturn in the manpower out there, is because it was pushed for college. And you got to have a college degree to do anything, which, if you don't have to have that degree to make an impact on the world, or to even get a job. I think I said it the other day. I know guys that started in the field and are now vice presidents of companies, right? They've never gone back and gotten a degree, but they're vice presidents of companies and they started out there in the field. So you don't have to. I think that's one of the cool things about the construction industry that I definitely learned later, is that you don't need the degree to be someone important or bigger, I guess, in the industry. Which a lot of, I don't know how many, but I feel like that's not very common in a lot of other industries, that you need to have something like that to, if we were talking about nursing or going to the hospital, it's like you need to have that degree to be a nurse, to be a doctor. Totally understand that, get that. But it's an industry that I feel a lot of people can jump into and try out and actually grow in, but it's looked at in a negative way.
If anything, having the experience in the trades will make you more respected as you move up the chain, because you have that knowledge and you have that experience, and you're not just coming out with a piece of paper and bossing a bunch of people around that have been in the industry for 20 years that know 10 times more than you do,
Or you're the engineer coming out of college. Or construction manager coming out of college.
In our cases, but that's a very good point. And like, I've said this before, construction is just such a huge and vast industry. I think any industry is kind of similar, but you can't know everything. And this is where, the topic of networking and mentorship and guidance comes up a lot, because that's an important part of construction. And I would say the number one differentiating factor between that person maybe came from the trades and is now a vice president probably great networking skills because they know how to build connections and understand the human side of things, but also like lifelong kind of just curious learners. Like the most successful people I've seen ask the stupidest questions or seemingly the stupidest questions because they know, how to connect the dots on certain things. They don't necessarily know right off the bat, but they know the right questions to ask and the right people to go to. And, that's an important part for any of the younger people out there listening is just be curious, ask questions, make connections. Because you never know. You can never make a bad connection. Even if it's somebody who seemingly you don't hit it off in the first place, if it's somebody you can lean on, whether it's a coworker or, another peer or a boss or even somebody from a different trade, it's always good to have those people to call on when you might need something.
Yeah. So what are some soft skills that you would say are like the most would make you the most successful just being in the industry? And not for like a certain level or a certain title, but like just in general. What are a few soft skills that you would say from your experience?
So number one, I just kind of mentioned it, but I'll mention it again, is networking. And it's kind of an art that not a lot of people are taught, and definitely not a lot of people are good at. Because when you first think networking, it's like going to big events and shaking hands and kissing babies and all this stuff and handing out business cards. But that is networking, but it's more on the connecting side where it's important, right? Actually connecting with humans. And probably the best way to do that, and I kind of touch on it in the book and some other stuff I've talked about, is like informal, infrequent contact. So you can go to big events, industry events, and it's nice to meet people, whatever. But a lot of times, you can imagine meeting 50, 100 people. You're not going to remember many people, not going to stand out. But if you have somebody in your office or somebody that you're in an industry association with, and you see them by like the cliche water cooler or the copier, those are the best times to connect because the guard's down. You're there both waiting for the coffee or whatever, waiting to use the washroom. Like just strike up a conversation and just ask questions. So part of that, and I'll just kind of continue with the networking, is like effective communication. Okay. So people think, okay, communication, I'm going to get my message across. To me, that's secondary. Primary is understanding the messages coming in and actually listening to the person you're talking to and communicating to understand, not to be understood. So I think a lot of times people go into conversations, especially, arguments and negotiations, which happens every day in construction, big or small. You got to understand where the other person is coming from. If you go in guns blazing and trying to outpower and outwit and outsmart somebody, that's one technique. But I find it more effective to sit back and analyze, listen to the other person, and just try and it takes an extra second, a little bit of practice, but try and see things from their perspective. So that's probably the number. I guess two things, networking and communication, kind of go hand in hand. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Yeah, networking, I didn't realize how important it was, or I didn't know how to make that until probably 10 years into my career. And I've made really strong connections. And I think it's exactly where you're going and making those more personal connections. I hate going to networking events. I get really antisocial and like, if I don't know anybody, I'm like, what are you supposed to ask somebody? What are you supposed to randomly walk up to somebody? What table am I supposed to sit at? That uncomfortableness is right there. And I think it's learning to have some type of small talk, but in general, it took time of just meeting with people, the one-on-ones, and doing more of that then makes me more comfortable going in networking events because I'm probably going to know people, or even if I don't, like I have more confidence in going and at least being able to talk about something. So it's just been it's definitely been a growth for me, but I would say from day one, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in a room of 100 people. What are you supposed to talk about? And especially if you're new to the industry or you're just new to doing those types of things, I would feel most people, if you're not a very extroverted person, you're going to be like, people don't know who I am. They don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know who they are. Like, why should I go and talk to them? It can be very daunting. And but I agree, especially in the last 9 years, it's been a big thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially at big events like that, because a lot of people aren't there because they want to be. It's because they're supposed to be or they're expected to be. Yeah. So and very few people I've found, very few people are actually extroverted to the point where they feel comfortable in a room with that many people because it's overwhelming, right? But it is a skill that comes with time, and you got to practice, and that's how you do it. And nobody's perfect at it, and there's going to be awkward situations. I love talking. I still come across awkward situations. But you're right, because even if you go to see a construction event, where you're going to walk up to somebody and be like, "Oh, so you like construction?" It's like, of course I do. Like that's why I'm here.
I
But
mean, they could say no. I
yeah,
just do it for a job.
exactly.
I
I
actually
just
don't
snuck
enjoy
in.
it.
Yeah, exactly. I just came for the food. But I find the best way to connect is you find things in common with people, right? You just ask questions like, oh, what did you do on the weekend? Oh, I went to the park. And oh, what did you do at the park? I played football. Oh, I love football. Who's your favorite team? The Eagles. Oh, I hate the Eagles. What about Kansas? Like, you know what I mean? And that's how you just keep asking questions and keep going. And obviously there's going to be some people that totally shut down and, they don't want to spend any time with you and you don't want to, annoy them. So you just say, okay, thanks. But most people I find are willing to open up, and it just might take, a couple kicks at the can. Because you never know too, like on the mental health side, if you approach somebody, you never know how their day's been. You never know what kind of news they just got. And different people react differently in depending on the situation.
Yeah.
On this, making that connection with them is a big deal, right? I mean, just like you said, that person could go home and be like, dude, some guy came and talked to me today.
Yeah.
That was really cool. No one's ever done that to me before. I think
Yeah.
Mario said it in his episode, like just having someone come and say, hey, thanks for doing what you're doing is really a big deal. So for some guys, that just saying hi, what'd you do for the weekend could be a bigger deal than we know. So I think that's a very good point.
Okay, so a light bulb just went off here, and I might go down a little bit of a tangent, but this is where the good stuff comes out. Because you just touched on a really good point, which is validation. And I think it's a basic human need that is missing in construction. Because a lot of people are just kind of looked at, especially when you get on a bigger job, a lot of people are just looked at it as a resource to get a job done. And it's almost dehumanizing at some point, especially when you go to some sites and there's not even clean facilities for people to like use the bathroom and hot water to wash their hands. And they're treated like animals. So that validation saying, hey, buddy, good job today. And showing people how they're contributing to the greater good is very powerful. But I'll take it one step further and maybe go in a bit of a different direction. It's just actually caring about people. And by that, I mean, how many times do you walk into the office and somebody says, hey, Kelly, how's it going? And you say, good, how are you? And you might have a shitty day, but you're just saying, good, how are you? Because you might not want to burden the person or whatever. So being in that situation and just saying, how are you doing? Or if you notice something's up, you can read people's, nonverbal cues of the body language, or they're looking down or they're looking sad, probing a little bit and saying, are you okay? And holding space for that person, being a safe space is extremely important, especially these days when it seems like everybody's got issues with anxiety. So
yeah,
yeah.
It's very true. Well, and I think also I don't know where I ever saw this or heard it, but it's like saying good morning and like how are you is just like so natural, and saying, oh, good, how are you? And then moving on. Like it's just part of like our day now that you don't really I would assume a lot of people don't really think about, do I want to go into detail? Right. It's just like, hey, good morning. How are you? Good, good. All right. And you move on. And so it's not really diving into a deeper understanding. There's certain people, if they come and ask me that, they're gonna get the like, okay, you're about to hear it. But those are people, like you kind of made the comment, if I'm safer with, that I feel good, I'm going to tell them. And if it's a really bad day, maybe I'll go and tell everybody. But it's so like common for us just to do that basic. We need to take it one step further.
Yeah. So that, let me ask you, or sorry, go ahead, Jenna.
I was gonna say, I don't know if it's necessarily that people aren't caring as much as I feel like it's that people feel like, the sidebars, conversations and stuff is taking away from their work. And I feel like people feel like if they're not strapped to their desk, that they're not going to be looked at as a valued member of their organization because they're not working, they're chatting, even if it's about something and caring and all of that. And even if it's not necessarily like, maybe their upper management would actually be really impressed if they were doing that, but they have a fear of having some kind of repercussion or being looked at as like a chatty Cathy by caring and talking to people about their personal lives. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a fine line because there are, you want to look at the old school thought, methods of construction where when you come to work, you forget about your personal life and you hit a switch and, you don't bring your personal problems here and you push it down and you be a man and you just power through. Okay, so then that's one thing. Now, on the other hand, you can't spend hours talking to people because if you're there to do a job, you're there to do a job. But I'll pose this to the group here is like, because everybody goes through stuff, right? Everybody deals with stuff on sometimes a daily basis. So when you come to work, say you wake up in the morning and your wife says, "Oh, I'm going to leave you." You go to work that day. Do you think you're going to be productive? Do you think your head is going to be in the game? It's going to be racing through your mind. So sometimes that's kind of an extreme example, but even something small, like, say you get some bad news about your dogs at the vet or something. And if you're able to have a space that's psychologically safe where you can express vulnerability and weakness and say, "Look, I'm struggling with this," you're going to shed a little bit of mental load. And in my experience, I can only speak for myself. When I get some stuff off my chest, it helps to clear my head, at least temporarily. So you picture an example, say something happens and you're operating at 50% capacity because you got distractions in your head. If you spend 5 minutes talking to somebody, telling them what's going on and how you feel and what's going on, and they say, "Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can do?" Then that safety there, you're going to be bumped up, maybe not to 100%, but you're going to be operating more effectively. So that's the argument I would say, an example I would give to somebody in management that might be like, "Oh, no, don't talk about that stuff. It's just a waste of time." It's like, take some time to get to understand. If they're just gossiping or starting rumors, fine. You got to address it at the management level.
Right.
But, we should be striving to create that environment, in my eyes, that culture of where people feel safe.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I think I interrupted you when I asked that question.
No, you were going to ask a question before Jenna started. Do you remember what it is, Angela? No.
Sorry.
No, it was related to what you were saying. And what I was thinking was, I'll kind of go back to it. Maybe if can I share a story here? Just real quick on the same topic.
Yep.
Okay, so there was a guy I used to work with, Tim, and he's just a saint, man. He's just one of these people who I always knew he was a good guy, but I hit this point in my life and I realized like we need more Tims out there. So we have 3 kids, but we had 2, and then we experienced fertility issues in between the second and third one. Okay, and bear with me because I'm going somewhere with this. So at the time I was working in estimating, which if anybody's worked in estimating, it's a pressure cooker and it's extremely stressful on a good day. So I was coming to work dealing with this stuff, and I had this stuff going on at home, and things were kind of, layering and up leveling. I wasn't very self-aware at the time. I was in my early 30s, and I find that's the time where you kind of really start to learn about yourself and realize that you're messed up, but so is everybody else, and that's the real beauty of life in the world. And this coworker, Tim, who was a division manager, he started coming by my desk every day and saying, "Hey, Ange, how's it going?" And I was like, "I'm fine." And then he'd say, "Okay," and he'd leave. And he'd come back the next day, be like, "Ange, how's it going?" And I'd be like, "Fine." And he kept coming. And we were good, like we chatted. But he kept checking in on me till one day I was like, "Tim, like, what the hell's going on? Why do you keep asking me how I'm doing?" He goes, "I can tell you're dealing with something. When you're ready to talk, I'm here for you." And I'm already getting emotional telling this story because he saw it happening. He saw the changes in my behavior, the presenteeism. Like, I was there physically, but I wasn't there mentally. I was coming in late. My performance suffered. So one day, everything kind of came to a head. It was a very difficult time for me. And sure enough, Tim was there when I needed him. And it turns out that he kind of went through a similar experience. And he essentially works with tradespeople because he can see this stuff happening. And he said, it's more common than you would think. But not a lot of people hear stories like that. And that's why, it's important to do what you guys are doing and have these conversations and share these difficulties to break the stigma, because everybody goes through stuff, but very rarely do people want to talk about it, especially in construction, because you're expected to be tough. You're expected to power through, leave your feelings at home. We got a job to do. Well, guess what, guys? That doesn't work, because eventually it catches up to you, whether you know it or not. Like, your body knows what's going on. Your body keeps the score, to take the title of a book. But anyway,
yeah,
that's my story.
That's a great story, and thank you for sharing that because that's very personal. So I
Yeah.
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah. No, and for a long time, I had a hard time sharing it, to be honest with you, just because of the stigma around it. But the more I shared and the more feedback I got saying, thank you. And same thing with posts on social media. Anytime there's a post around mental health, there's always one person who will say, sometimes they're a complete stranger, and it's just, thank you. I'm dealing with some stuff, and it's nice to know that, people are talking about it and that it's, being normalized. So,
Yeah. Well, and everyone's dealing with something, right? I mean, even if it seems small to you, or everyone's dealing with something. And I think that's something that Kelley and I are very big on trying to share, right? Trying to share people's stories, and especially with the men in the industry, because women will share more often, I feel like, than men when it comes to personal stories like that. So,
yeah.
it opens up the conversation, so people are talking about it. They're feeling more comfortable talking about it, and they're feeling more comfortable talking about it with their leaders. And I try to, as a leader, encourage like my project engineers and stuff, like always tell me what's going on. If they're not comfortable, that's fine with telling me exactly what it is, but tell me if something is happening, right? So that I know that, maybe you can only handle the small tasks today. I think it's good for business, and it's also good for your personal health.
Yeah. Well, let's take this example and to get back to some technical construction stuff. Like you look at physical safety, okay? Like in the last 40, 50 years, it's come leaps and bounds, with recording near misses and documents and toolbox talks and, uh, hazard assessments, all this stuff, which is amazing. It's a super safe industry to work in now. Yeah, it's high risk and things can go wrong, but there's a lot of procedures and people. Imagine if we took the same type of, and as a result of that, fatalities have come down, injuries have come down, everybody's working safer. Imagine if you took the same methodology and applied the same resources to the mental component of safety. Because, take the example we took before. If your wife's going to leave you, you come to work and you're working with tools or you're working on an elevated work platform. If you're not paying attention, you're going to be at high risk to make a mistake. That might involve a safety issue, might involve an injury. So, mental health is a component of health. And it feels silly to have to say that, but I think it's important to say part of a health and safety program should encompass the psychological and mental aspect as well. It kind of touches on the labor shortage too. Like the key to the future is going to be doing more with less. We're not going to snap our fingers and get more people in the industry. We need everybody to step up and start performing more, which is kind of funny because I think most people you talk to are already burnt out and overworked. But it's addressing that mental component and the fit for duty aspect, because it goes beyond just physical stuff. You have to mentally be there, prepared, ready to work, dealing with your stuff. And if that means taking 5 minutes and venting to a coworker or taking the morning off and getting therapy, that's what it's going to take, guys. And we all have to be, open to having these conversations and figuring it out.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Something I wanted to, so that actually is something we would talk about on a previous episode, was the physical versus mental health, like safety aspect. Do you think that we focus so heavily on physical safety because we think that if you're physically safe, that it's going to kind of like tie into your mental health? Because people are like, if you're doing a really, really unsafe task, like let's say you're you're a steel worker or something, you don't really have the capacity in your brain to be thinking about what's happening at home, right? Like you are literally just like doing the task, trying to not fall. I mean, do you think that has anything to do with it, or do you think it's literally just that we don't think about the mental aspect of it as an industry?
I think most people don't think about it because it's not tangible. Like if you get physically hurt, if you cut your finger, like there's blood. If you break a bone, you can see it. If you throw your shoulder out, you're wearing a sling.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if you're dealing with mental illness, you can sometimes pick up on symptoms, but most people are walking around seemingly perfectly fine. just working away, but they might be struggling, substance abuse, suicidal ideation, all these things. It's not tangible. So I think that's what most people struggle with, because you can't touch it and feel it and see it in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And when you do when you do see it, you think of a person in the movies in a straitjacket that's like on the complete end of the spectrum,
Mhm.
which people associate mental illness with. But there's really a spectrum, so.
Yeah. No, it's very true. Yeah, and I think people don't understand too, because I actually deal with I haven't really talked about this in the podcast, but I have a personal connection with mental health. My mom is actually bipolar, and it's pretty severe. She actually is she's currently in her manic state, but it's seasonal, so it goes up and down. But when she's manic, like she's in denial. She has like no recollection that she's even doing the things that she's doing. It completely changes her personality. It changes, everything that she does. And so there's probably a lot of people in the industry that have severe mental illnesses like that are able to kind of hide them a little bit, but in some regard, their personalities change depending on, how severe and where they are in the mental state. So, if someone blows up in a meeting like completely irrational, and everyone's like, oh, just crazy Steve again, or whatever, and not realizing that he is suffering from bipolar or personality disorder or something. I mean, I think that's something that we as an industry also need to look at is, people have mental illness, and it's basically like a cancer. It's equivalent to having like cancer or like another disease. It's your brain is an organ, and it could be
Yeah.
just like anything else in your body.
For sure. Mental health is health. It's an ailment, but I think the difficulty is that it's not tangible. And thank you for sharing. And like, I think everybody has a personal connection, whether it's close or far. Like I've got a colleague who has struggled with suicide attempts in the past, and it is just some real heavy stuff until you experience it, which a lot of people don't like talking about it, but I guarantee, like within 5, 6 of your friends, somebody's going through something. But once it hits you, either personally or through a contact, then it really sinks in. It's like, this is some serious stuff. This isn't just stuff you see in the movies. Like, there's so many people walking around dealing with, and there are some stats that are fresh in my mind. This was based in Canada. So KMH is it's a center for addiction and mental health. It's the largest mental health hospital in Canada. And they do some kind of world leading research as well on the topic. Still severely underfunded though. No, not a surprise there. But they were saying 20 people every day in Canada die by suicide. Like, picture 20 people in a room every day die by suicide. I think it was 12 or 15 people overdose every day in Canada. 500,000 people each week miss work due to mental health. The cost to support mental health illnesses in Canada was like $51 billion annually or something ridiculous. Like, this is a real problem that's causing a lot of people heartache and a lot of people money. So why aren't more people talking about it and doing things? It's really frustrating. I don't know.
Do you know what the
I was
statistics?
hoping you guys have the answers.
No, definitely not.
We have our own mental health that we have to deal with. So it's like we're part of that struggle of trying to figure all that out.
Yeah, we're part of those statistics. Yeah. Sorry, Jenna, you were going to say something.
What is the I guess in Canada, what's the statistics for the suicide rates in construction?
So construction, it's I think three times in Canada, 4 times in the States, if I remember correctly, on average higher than compared to other industries. So we see more people dealing with mental illness, more people dealing with substance abuse. And I don't think it's a total function of construction itself. I think it's pointing to an indicator that the type of people who typically get into construction are more predisposed to have these issues. But to me, that's not.
Yeah.
To me, that's not saying like, oh yeah, I know, it's just because there's a bunch of screw ups in construction, so no, that's a reason that the industry needs more support in this regard to help those people. Because there's a saying that pops into mind, but it's like, and it's terrible, but it's, if you can't finish high school, you can finish concrete. Like that's a perfect example
Oh
of
gosh.
it's a perfect example of this stigma of
Yeah.
construction workers. Oh, you're too stupid to do something else, so you end up in construction. You're worthless. Basically, that's what they're thinking. So you're telling me a person who hears and sees these messages isn't going to turn to stuff like substance abuse, is going to be less likely to admit when they're struggling or having a problem, more likely to kind of self-medicate through substance abuse, alcoholism, stuff like that. To me, it's like a no-brainer. I'm not an expert in this at all. It's just that, very personally vested and interested in it because we got a long way to go and there's a lot of potential for, improvements here.
Well,
What
and
do
you
you
can't.
think?
Go ahead,
Go,
Kelly.
Jenna.
You're good. Go for it.
I was gonna say, what do you think about when we're talking about schedules and pushing those schedules, and we're having tight budgets? What do you think that? Do you think that has a kind of, can't think of the word, a a play into some of these guys' mental health out there? Is that, they're being pushed with some heavy schedules and budgets that they've got to meet, that then creates what you just talked about in maybe hitting on, taking some extra things when they go home, having some beers after work, but turns into every single day kind of thing.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I've only ever worked in construction, but so maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I think it's a real special industry. I mean, special in a good way and a bad way, because you hit on like a very important topic of budgets and schedules, because most of the ones I've seen, especially on larger projects, are very unrealistic. So it's almost analogous to somebody saying, Kelly, here, I need you to dig this hole, and it needs to be done in an hour, and I'm not going to give you a shovel. So that's essentially what it's like, because these schedules are so tight, and of course you have to be within budget, and a lot of the times the supports aren't there. So what do you expect? People, and a lot of times people, and this contributes to burnout and elevated levels of stress, is they don't have the responsibility to make certain decisions, like authorizing overtime or hiring additional people to help. So you're asking somebody to perform this essentially impossible task, and they're thinking in the back of their mind, I got to do this or I'm going to get in shit. Of course, that's contributing to the stress. So one thing, and I had a post on this recently that got a lot of interesting comments because there was a stat I saw, it was on the Autodesk website, that like literally, I'm not even making this up, 98% of mega projects, so like big jobs, go over schedule and over budget. So you'd think if almost every single job is over schedule and over budget, that somebody would catch on and say, something's wrong with the way we're doing these budgets and schedules.
I wonder if they got that stat from the How Big Things Get Done book. Have you read that, Angelo?
No.
It's a whole, the book is really awesome. I'm trying to get Jenna to add it to her book list. I would add it because it talks about mega projects, and the guys that wrote the book studied large mega projects around the country and found similar of that failure, and that has stats on it. It's probably one of the best, I would say, construction stats on like mega projects, because it hits on that. So it makes me wonder if the Autodesk post like pulled from that, because it's
possibly
really, I highly recommend the book.
Yeah, no, thank you. I wrote it down here. I'll add it to the list. But you raised a very good point, and I agree 100%. It's like unrealistic expectations, and almost when these requests come through, particularly from management, it's almost kind of tongue in cheek, like, hey, you gotta get this done. And they know it's not possible, but everybody's just trying to do their best with what they got, I guess, at the end of the day. So
How do you
I think that's a
how do
big
we think we
factor.
fix that? Do you think it's like educating from the top down? Like how do we because I feel like a lot of it is, since I think we talked about this on previous episodes too, but we're competing for a project, and so we're gonna lie and say, yeah, we can make that schedule happen. Everyone's gonna say, yep, I can make that schedule happen. No one's gonna actually raise their hand and say, hey, actually, this is not realistic, right? Because they want the project. So is it educating the owner groups? Is it everyone putting their foot down and saying, no, we're not doing this schedule. This is unrealistic. Like, how do you even approach that?
That's a huge monster, but I'll have a stab at it because it's, I think it starts with education and awareness. And you mentioned owners group, that's a big one, but even the contractors like GCs, I think subs know it and probably feel it the most because they're the ones that are, specialty contractors are the ones that are where the rubber meets the road. But it's an education piece and saying, out of those stats, say 98% of mega projects, who suffers in those? Everybody. Because the owner gets a late job for a higher budget than they anticipated, probably. The GC, it ends up in court, and it's really messy. So it's in everybody's best interest to take a step back and be more realistic about stuff. I think it ultimately comes down to cost, because people, want things for a low dollar, but you got to be reasonable in saying, if I pay more here, I'm probably going to pay less on the back end. Because guaranteed, if there's one thing I learned from my time in estimating, it is that if there's a number that's way low at the time of closing, it's not going to be low at the end of the job, because there's change orders and frustration and RFIs and admin work and paperwork and this and that, and there's so much. So what is the true cost of construction? It's all this hidden stuff in between the communication and people working together and just getting a job done. So I would tell this to the owners: you have to pay a fair price and expect a realistic timeline to get a job done. Listen to the contractors. Don't go by historical data or what the last job did or what you think. Get feedback. And what's kind of comforting is seeing more collaborative models like that, especially on bigger jobs. You're seeing things go through to IPD or progressive design build, and where owners and contractors are working together and share risk equally. Because that's, again, risk in my mind automatically equate to dollars. Because when you get money involved, people are more likely to listen and play nice in the sandbox.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Kelly and I, so we actually met on an IPD job, and and I think that the risk aspect of it, or I guess the sharing the risk, made it so much smoother. And every one of my field guys that I worked with said it was the best project they had ever been on, because they didn't have to worry about whose fault it was. They just had to figure out a way to solve it. And it was everyone collaborating and figuring out a way to solve the issue, because at the end of the day, saving the dollar was everyone's dollar. And so it was, I mean, I think there are some pros and cons with IPDs and, that kind of stuff. And I know that we're trying to work through it and get it so it's a little more reasonable and a little more realistic. But I think if we just had that mindset in general of, I technically am taking on the risk for my company, but at the end of the day, I'm really saving myself, because if I come up with solutions and stuff now, even on traditional projects, and I'm helping this other subcontractor, figure out a solution to X, Y, and Z, instead of pointing the finger and saying, well, this is your problem, you figure it out, then I'm saving myself all the heartache, all the change order pricing, all of the time I'm spending, the stress, the lack of communication, and then you're also building this really bad rapport. And all of a sudden, the rest of the project is hell for you, because now you're fighting. You're fighting everybody.
You brought up really good. You know what the key is to a better construction industry? Rebuilding the construction mindset. I just had to give you guys a plug there. No, but so here's a question for you guys. Did you get into construction to fulfill the minimum requirements of a contract?
Oh, hell no.
No, but that's what the industry has come to, especially on lump sum jobs, design, bid, build. Everybody's looking to see the least amount of work for the most amount of money and the least amount of risk. Owners are pushing risks onto GCs. GCs are pushing risks down to subs. And it's all about managing risk and fulfilling the minimum requirements of a contract. I didn't get into the industry either. I got into the industry to build cool stuff and meet new people and do cool things. And that's what I like doing. So, but you brought up a good point too, how with IPD, people are less likely to be worried about getting in shit for making a mistake, or everybody's super defensive in construction.
Yeah.
It comes down to paperwork. And why do you have paperwork? To cover your ass. Because when somebody comes and asks you something, you say, no, it wasn't me. I got the piece of paper here. We commissioned that unit October 31st, and now it's your problem. It's like, no, guys, let's put our heads together and figure it out, because we're on a team.
Yeah, the paperwork, I mean, I think I wouldn't say I'm the best at it in general, but there's certain parts of it that I'm like, oh, we're keeping that email, make sure I added that into the job folder over here, and going, okay, let's write this down. What are all the things that are holding us up? Let's make sure we notify. Let's do all the things, because at the end of the job, when we're starting to fight for nickels and dimes and or schedule, liquidated damages, you've got something, right? That's what it all comes down to. Or you get a back charge from somebody and you're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? You have to have paperwork. And it just, there's the element of, and you said it earlier, is the cost of money that's happening in between just building a building. There's so much money being spent just writing RFIs and figuring out whose back charge goes where and where, who's going to do this part of it, and just all of that conversation. How many people are talking about those things? And how much money is being spent when we really just want to build something? And it's I think I've heard some of the guys that have been around 30, 40 plus years in the industry saying it was easier to build things back then because you had less paperwork. And there's definitely an increase in the risk paperwork that we're talking about right now that created we've got to stay on track. We've got to protect ourselves, got to protect the company.
Well, I think we're construction, like I always joke, like I feel like a construction lawyer and I'm building a case. That's like literally what it feels like. There's all this extra paperwork that needs to happen so that and you're doing it with the thought of in case anything ever happened, right? And there are tools that could also help with, what's currently happening, but at the end of the day, that's what it's for. And if people just trusted each other instead of saying, well, that didn't happen. Oh, hold on, let me send you this email from 2020. You know what I mean? Like it's ridiculous that we're even fighting.
I do love sending that email.
It's satisfying. It's really satisfying. Yeah.
Be like, see, I told you.
But no, you're right. And there's a time and a place for it. Like if we're talking millions of dollars, you got to do that. But I've been in situations where we're in a meeting and things escalate and it's say a $10,000 issue. And then you look around the table and there's the construction manager and the project manager and the assistant project manager and the coordinator. And then there's the project manager from the sub. I'm like, this meeting is costing $20,000. Like if you calculate the hourly rate and the work we could be doing that's productive if we weren't here, like, so it's really frustrating. I had a similar experience. One of the earlier jobs I did in my career was an IPD, and it was a research building. It was $150 million, but I remember we were talking, the project director, he's actually the president of Elliston now, which is pretty cool. Kieran Haw, great guy. But we were sitting in a meeting and it was a team meeting. There were like 20 people. And he goes, 10 years ago, we would have done this job with 5 people. But it's all the admin stuff. And now you got emails and paperwork. And it's funny when an RFI comes through a shop drawing because the timer starts and everybody's like, okay, I have 10 days to respond. Why not just do it? Like, why wait 10 days? And then look, oh, we got this one's 2 days overdue. We got to get it out. Forget, like, just do it, guys. Now it's more, it's almost like, and I might sound a little jaded now and upset, but maybe I'm just getting old. But it's almost like, the building just validates what the paperwork says. Like the main output of a project is the paperwork at the end of the day. It's the O&M binders. It's the closeout documents. It's the commissioning report. Just go out and look at the building. Is it done? Does it work? Like, come on, guys. Not be silly. Anyway.
Yeah. This will be our last question. So how do you view, or I guess, what are your thoughts on the next 10 years after all of our current leaders retire? What do you think is going to happen? How do you see the industry?
First of all, I think they're going to try and retire. Nobody's going to let them because we still need them. It's funny. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but I'll be 40 this year, and any place I've worked, it's been the same. There's a contingency of like an older population. Now they're like 60s on the brink of retirement, and then there's a huge gap, and then there's people like my age and younger. Whereas before, I think it was between, if you want to label it, boomers and Gen X, there was a little more continuity between generations and a little more time for guidance and mentorship. So I think we're at an interesting point in the career, in the industry, getting back to your question. We're almost on the cusp of like a generational transition. And the way that the next generation of leaders thinks and lives, and their motivations and inspirations are completely different than previous, right? Like now there's a lot more focus on, I'm not a big fan of the term work-life balance, but integrating work with home. A lot of more families now are dual income, where the wife isn't expected to stay home and take care of the house while the man's out making, the bacon, bringing home the bacon. So it's going to take a real mindset shift. And I think a lot of people are going to struggle with it. So there's the element of different lifestyle. There's the element of not a lack of, but lesser experience, just because the next generation hasn't had that much experience. And I think there's that divide is exacerbated by the fact that boomers, especially Gen X to some degree, have a hard time communicating with the younger generation, whatever's below millennials. I don't remember, Gen Y or whatever.
Gen Z.
Gen Z.
Because when I talked to, and it's funny, there was a post that I had on Instagram that I guess went viral, and it was about this question, the generational divide. And it had over 1,000 comments. Most of them were angry younger people about how boomers gatekeep and they're slow and they're not safe and all this and that. But once those guys are gone and gals are gone, we lose all that experience. We lose all that knowledge. So yeah, it might be safer. It might be, more open to life stuff, but it's probably going to take longer to do stuff because we're going to be figuring some stuff out. And we're not going to have those mentorships and opportunities for guidance. So to me, it's going to be a rough few years, I think, because the labor shortage isn't going anywhere. There's a lot of effort now to get younger people involved, especially in the trades, which is great, but it's going to take 3 to 5 years for those people to come up to speed to solve problems. In the meantime, people are retiring faster than the intake is coming in, which, by the way, isn't a one-to-one. So we're short on the delta, but that's the quantity of workers. The quality is another aspect. So really, for every one person retiring, you probably need 2 or 3 people coming in, and we have a lot less than that. So now I don't want to sound like too pessimistic, so I'm going to add a positive spin on it, because where there's huge challenge, there's huge opportunity. So people like us who want to have these conversations and talk about these problems and come up with solutions are going to be very well positioned to take those leadership roles, make the changes that the industry needs to see, and yeah, just be the future. It's actually really exciting. It's a great time to be alive, guys. It's especially in construction.
Yeah. It's also really nerve-wracking for us people that are in the generation that are going to be in those leadership positions sooner than we probably are ready for.
Yeah.
Too, so.
Yeah.
But
well, that's another interesting point too, because a lot of younger people I deal with, and myself included, is very ambitious to move up a level, right? Like even as a coordinator, I was like had dreams to be a vice president or a president of a company, and thought I was capable, 5 years from when I started. So I think a lot of people, especially at jumping companies, you know what I mean, for an extra $10,000, or if you're a PC and you can go somewhere else as a junior PM or a PM, you'd make that move to get that title, but it doesn't mean you're ready for the roles and responsibilities. So
Right.
At the end of the day, job's going to suffer. Your mental health is going to suffer because it's going to stress you out because you don't know and you don't want to ask because, they hired me to do this job and I'm expected to know and this and that. So I think that's the problem we're going to face too in the future. Just add another one there.
Yeah.
I agree though. I mean, I think it's a interesting, based on that generational shift, I definitely think there's some major things going to be happening in the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't say I'm scared, and more or less, I think there's the interesting to see where it goes. And I'm happy to be there to watch it happen in lieu and being in the center of it and watching it happen in lieu of being too young or too old and going, damn, I wish I can be a part of it. So I think that's where I am, is that I'm excited to move forward and be in the middle of it.
Yeah.
So that's for me.
No, and sorry, I'm just going to keep going here. You guys cut me off, just shut the meeting off. But
go for it.
I think people are going to come to the realization, because stuff's got to get built. There's more. I'm not up on statistics in the States, but in Canada, immigration's huge because they're trying to grow the population. So where are these people going to live? What roads are they going to drive on to get to work? And the buildings that they go to, because we're probably going to be pushed back into at least a hybrid, if not full time in the somebody's got to build these offices and all this infrastructure. So we need more and more and more. We're going to have less people. So I think that we're going to reach a point where everybody's going to look around and be like, guys, we're screwed. Like, we got to do something different here. Let's put our heads together and figure out a better way to do it, because it's not sustainable the way we're going. We're just driving everybody into the ground.
Yeah.
No.
One thing you say in your book, and I think you also have like a one of your reels you have out on your Instagram. So you talk about how our industry is going to look in 2030 in terms of like the cost projections. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I think so. Right now, globally, construction was, oh man, you put me on the spot here. I don't remember the numbers, but it was like 8 billion, $8 or $9 billion, trillion dollars. And this projected 2032, I think, is over 14 trillion. So you're looking at like a 30 or 40% increase globally. So, who's going to do that work? Where are they going to come from? I know AI is going to improve, but I don't think we're going to see Boston Dynamics build a robot that's going to, lay block and tape and finish drywall, all that stuff at the same time. Maybe that's true. You know what? That's a business idea. Do you guys know anybody that builds robots or anything?
Nope.
Oh, there's a couple robots. I've seen a taping robot.
Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and then there's the layout robot by Dusty Robotics that I think that is awesome. But I've seen a taping robot. It's still in its early stages, but I mean, I think that's where some of the ideas are going. But you still like some of those. You still need a person to facilitate the robot or what it's doing. So it's in general great. You have somebody, but you have a robot, but you still need a person, and you need potentially multiple people. Just with like Dusty Robotics, like the layout, you need someone on the VDC BIM side, and then you need someone out in the field. So that's two people that you need right there. Can they be the same person? I don't know, but that's two people right there just for a robot. Now the production it makes, okay, maybe it saves, right? More people, but we're not going to get rid of. And the robot, it's not like we're getting robotics coming out every month that it's going to pick up and save us in 5 years to be able to take on $14 trillion worth of work in the world. No.
Well, even like, and we go back to the whole schedule thing, right? Like, because that's how a schedule is built. It's like, okay, you frame the walls, then the plumbers do the rough-in, then electrical does the rough-in, then you board the walls, and then what happens when the concrete pour is late and the structure's late going up? Oh, compress. Let's stack some trades. So then you got 3 robots in there doing their thing, and I don't see it.
I'm taking that snip for social media of you being a robot.
Yes, yeah, I can. You want me to do I can do that.
Like it.
Part-time dancer too.
I think the biggest issue with having robots would be if they messed up, who's paying for it? The robot isn't.
The robot company. See, there you go. Now these contractors have somebody to go back to. It's like, it's like when you buy a pre-engineered product. Just we're shoving the risk down. You're gonna sue the robot, maybe. I don't know.
Well, it's like if you have a scissor lift on site and it like breaks down and causes damage or whatever, it leaks. The company that has the robot of the scissor lift is usually paying for it. So it would literally come down to that. Unless it's like a robot company with a robot CEO, which we're getting into like fantasy films at this point.
But you know what? Somebody 10 years from now might be looking back at this podcast being like, these guys knew what was going on.
Maybe.
You know what the answer is? And maybe this is another show, but modular. Modular is, I think, a big element to the future, modular construction. It still hasn't caught on, at least here. People haven't figured it out. And the big guys here have bought big facilities and subsequently shut them down because they weren't making money. But I think that's a key to the future. Anyway, I've used enough of your guys' time today.
No, this has been a great conversation. This has been like exactly what we kind of wanted and more. So, well, Angelo, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been awesome. Like I said, I feel like I know you after reading your book, and I think one of the main things that Kelley and I are passionate about this podcast is to give out resources. So if you want to tell people where to find you, where to find your Instagram, where to buy your book, what it's called, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, so the book Human Side of Construction, it's available on Amazon, and it's basically, if I had to summarize who kind of the target audience is, it's a good reminder for people who are midway or later on in their careers, but it's especially useful for people just thinking about getting into the industry or early on in their careers, because it really talks about the good, the bad, and the ugly, the stuff that you don't learn about in school. And what took me 20 years in the industry to learn. I tried to condense that to kind of help shorten the learning curve. It does focus on building relationships because I think that's the number one recipe for success. Because once you learn all the technical aspects, the best way to differentiate yourself is by making those human connections and building your network. Pretty active on Instagram, social media, Instagram at Human-Sided Construction, angelosuntries.com. There's some stuff there, and LinkedIn as well. I started having some fun there too. And yeah, I just want to say, appreciate what you guys are doing. Thanks a lot for having me on. I love the concept, and the work you guys are doing is very meaningful, and it's very much needed in construction. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Angelo.
Awesome.
That's great.
Thank you.